even get into the deployment side of things, there's a few things that I do want to talk about. One of them being, what is deployment? And one of the things that we're going to be talking about a whole lot, which kind of follows on to the answer, piggybacks off the answer to the first question, what is production? So let's start first with deployment, right? What is deployment? What does that mean? Well, up until now, you've been building out your applications and you have been working with them. They've been working. You have demonstrated tons of features. You've shown it in it's not just proof of concept. You're actually creating the thing and it's actually running. But the question becomes, where is it running? And the answer to, what we're going to be talking about here with deployment is probably, or hopefully, going to bring some clarity to the discussion that we've had previously about the client and the server technically being different things. Things that work locally are not necessarily going to work when deployed. But back to that original question, what is deployment? You have been building and testing and running your application locally, but if you wanted to go tell your friends and family about your brand new app, guess what's going to happen if you tell them to go to localhost 5173 on their computer? Nothing. Notice that I can be running something on localhost 5173, and then you're following along, and you have something running on localhost 5173, and Marcus has something running on 5173, and they're all different applications because localhost is a farce. It's not really. Localhost is just the shorthand for 127.0.0.1, which is just the IP address of your local machine. It is an IP address not given to any remote website or to any remote server. It is simply a shorthand saying my computer. So localhost 5173 for me may be very different from localhost 5173 for you. When we talk about deployment, essentially what we're saying is we're going to take our app and put it on the internet. That's the most simple way to explain what deployment is. But as we're going to see, it is a much more complex process. When we deploy our application, what we need to do is find somewhere that will host it. And then when we do that, we need to actually put the app on that computer. But if we think about it, a server is really not all that much different from my computer or your computer. The biggest difference is, well, it's going to be running a different operating system, and it's not like, it doesn't have like a screen and a mouse keyboard that you can use to access it. Imagine if your application was able to just run on your computer and you just gave out your own IP address and said, yeah, just send a request here to my app, to my computer, and you'll access my computer or my application, which is running on my computer. There's a security issue there, right? So deployment is the process in which you take your app and you run it on a server somewhere. It could be a physical server that you have the right network configurations to, and you're hosting the server yourself and you've worked out something with your ISP, or in most situations nowadays, you're going to use some kind of cloud service to store and run your application on, and then configure that computer, that server, to accept incoming HTTP requests and forward them to your running application. For this, we're going to use AWS, which is Amazon Web Services. You will need to create an account. It will ask you for a credit card, but don't worry. You are going to be given a free access to a basic tier of AWS for, I think it's like 6 months or something along those lines. So you'll need to give a credit card, but you don't need to actually pay anything. It is very unlikely that any of your applications will actually, go over what that free tier usage is. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we go through. This is the version of the reading that you will be getting access to shortly. And there is a link. Note that you're going to want to get your deployment process started sooner rather than later, and that creating an account can take up to 24 hours. So as soon as I'll post the link as well on Slack so that, in case it takes me longer to get the reading posted, you can at least get that process started. But you're going to create your AWS account, and that's what we're going to end up using for the deployment process. So now that we've kind of just discussed very vaguely what deployment means, the second question that I want to talk about is, what is production? You have been building and running your application locally on your machine. And if we're going to deploy it, there are a couple of things to consider. One is that a lot of the features that we're using to keep things running are not necessarily the most computationally efficient. When we're deploying to some cloud service like AWS or Azure or whatever, services are out there, they're going to charge you based on how much your app is using the computer. Now, again, with the free tier, you're not really going to see those charges unless you have something horrendously inefficient, which I don't think is going to be the case for y'all. And when I say horrendously inefficient, I mean that it would have to be doing things 24/7, constantly, like running queries and receiving requests and things like that. And I'm not saying that you don't have the capability to build an app that's going to do that. I'm just saying that you most likely don't have that right now. And again, not because of the quality of the application, but because you don't have the user base, right? Essentially, as long as you don't have people constantly sending requests like hundreds of times a minute, you shouldn't have a problem. But still, we want to minimize as much as we can the amount of work that the computer needs to do for everything. So what we're going to be talking about is that there are some changes that may need to be made to prepare our application for production. So in short, a production application is just the version of the app that's running on the remote deployed server. And there are going to be some changes that we're going to need to make to do that. For one, think about any of your secrets that are used, what's your connection string and things like that. That could be a potential problem. You're posting that on GitHub, and if you deploy your application out there, that means that now somebody could potentially take that and use it to access your database, which if you have built an application that other people can use, puts other user data at risk. So we'll be going through and talking about how to prepare your app for production, and then we'll talk about how to get it deployed, and we'll go through that whole process. So just so that we can get it out of the way, we want to launch an instance. Now, what I mean by that is we need to tell Amazon, AWS, hey, go ahead and make a computer for me. They're not literally going to build a computer. They use what's called computer instancing. They take, really, really strong, large, powerful computers and basically dedicate a portion of the available resources to different people, monitor it, charge you for it, all that good stuff. Let me go log into AWS. Log into my account. Go. All right. So once you've created your account and you have logged in, it seems different. I'm going to click on the top right, and I may need to update some. I feel like this isn't what I should be seeing. Let me see if I can go find. Yeah, because that's marketplace. I don't want that. I want this. Okay. So I click sign in, and then it's going to sign me in because I just signed in. There we go. That's more like it. All right. So this is your AWS management console. And we're going to be using what's called ec2. Now, ec2 is one of the many millions of acronyms that we use as developers. It is Amazon's proprietary system, and it stands for Elastic Cloud Compute. Essentially, like I was talking about, it allows Amazon to host your application on their server without dedicating an entire server machine. You can just use a flexible instance. And what's great about ec2 is as your use increases, it can give you more usage, and you can add to it as it's live without having to like shut everything down and start the whole process over. So ec2 is what we're going to use, and we're going to be doing pretty much everything today in the terminal. So in that console, I can I've recently visited ec2 because it's pretty much the only thing that I use here. But if that's not there, click the search bar and type ec2, and you're going to go click on ec2. On the top right, it's going to pre-select a region. I would recommend picking something central to what your expected user base would be, right? So if, with the group that's making the wine app, it revolves around like a family winery, maybe use the winery general location. So if it's on the West Coast, go ahead and select, US West Oregon or North California. If it's towards the East, Ohio or North Virginia. But ultimately, this doesn't make all that much of a difference for now. This is just, Amazon has their computers all over the place, and you can select where you want to actually host it. Now, notice right here, there's a nice big launch instance button. I'm going to click it. Name your instance. So we should give our instance a name. You don't necessarily have to, but when you have multiple instances running, which is something you may do as you continue to build your portfolio and everything, it's nice to be able to look at it and see exactly what the server is. So I'm going to call it FSWD October 22 T3 deployment demo. And we need to select essentially the operating system that the server is going to run. You use Windows or Mac. We don't want to do that. We're going to use Ubuntu. Make sure that it is selecting server version 22.04. Right? It should pre-select it. And it has this nice text here that says free tier eligible, which means we are allowed to use this without having to pay extra money. You can leave everything else the way that it is. And then down here where it says instance type, these are the various computer specifications that you can use. And you'll notice that there's really only one free one. It gives us one CPU, 1 gigabyte of memory, and it shows you the pricing, right? On-demand Linux pricing is roughly a cent an hour. Windows pricing is about that. They're all mostly the same price, except for this RHEL pricing. But we're doing Linux, a cent an hour of compute time. Not bad. If you end up continuing with your application, for example, and you're expanding and you get a user base, you would probably end up needing to upgrade to one of these much larger ones that give you, 16 CPUs and 32 gigs of memory. And that does run 75 cents an hour, but sticking to free tier. Now, there is a limitation. We're getting something called T2 micro, which means that we may run into some problems, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And I'll talk about some workarounds. Key pair login. When you are deploying, the way that you are going to essentially need to connect is through your terminal, and you don't want anybody, just anybody to be able to connect. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a secure key pair. Essentially, two strings are going to be created and put into files. One is going to be some kind of secret key that is saved on Amazon side. The other is going to be a public key that can be used to essentially decrypt it and verify that we should be able to have access to it. And that file is going to be very, very important and very, very sensitive. So you want to make sure that when you create your key pair, that you do not save it anywhere that it is prone to be seen. Hint, hint, don't you dare stick that in your GitHub repo. Don't do it. Save it in your documents. This goes for, some students that I know that love to use OneDrive. I wouldn't put it on OneDrive. Put it on a local volume on your computer that is not going to be accessed anywhere else. So I'm going to call this, I need to come up with a key name. So I'm going to call it FSWD October 22 demo and create a new key pair. Let me go double check. We're going to do RSA and .pem, RSA.pem. Cool. And then it says, when prompted, store the private key in a secure and accessible location on your computer, because we're going to need it later to connect to our instance. So I'm going to create a key pair. Oops. Right. FSWD October 22 demo. Create pair. And it will download it. No, I don't want to do that. It's going to stick that in my downloads folder. I don't want it to be in my downloads folder. So I'm going to take that and I'm going to put it somewhere else. In my documents that I use locally, not program files, users, M1AM1. And then I go to my documents. I have a work section and Kenzie, and I'm going to make a folder in here called deployment keys. I'm just going to move it in there. Now, it's very important that you pay attention to where that is saved, because I'm going to need to go into that folder. And this is where we need to run a terminal command to connect to our remote instance once it's deployed and to get it deployed. Network settings. Just create a security group and make sure that these boxes are checked. We're going to allow SSH traffic from anywhere, which means this is how we're going to determine where we can connect with. And the reason why I pick anywhere is because even if you pick your IP address may change. You might move, your ISP might just regularly rotate out IP addresses. There's no guarantee that this is going to be static and stay there forever. Anywhere, there's obviously a security risk there, but that's why we use that PEM file, because now I can use that and make sure that I am safe when connecting. Now, HTTPS from traffic and from traffic from the internet and HTTP traffic from the internet, this is what is going to allow our server when running to actually accept incoming HTTP requests. To get that working on your computer, there's a lot more that needs to be done. You need to call your internet service provider, and it's just we don't want that anyway. This is a computer that's going to have nothing except for the source code of our application running on it. So we're okay. So we check those 3 boxes, create a security group, scroll down, configure storage. Free tier eligible customers can get up to 30 gigabytes of EBS general purpose SSD or magnetic storage. And that's not per instance, that's overall. So I don't necessarily recommend you sticking a 30 in there because you won't be able to, deploy another application. I'm going to put 12 or 16, for now. Actually, I'm going to leave it as 8. If you have image uploads and whatnot, just make sure that this storage is going to cover, all of the images that you already have uploaded on there, and then give yourself wiggle room for any new uploads. So I'm going to leave that. Advanced details, nothing that we really need to do here. And then we're going to launch. Notice that I'm not clicking add new volume. I'm just configuring my storage. And then I'm going to come over here to the summary, and at the bottom, launch instance. So free tier in your first year includes 750 hours of T2 micro or T3 micro in the regions in which T2 micro is unavailable. Instance usage on free tier AMIs per month, 30 gigabytes of storage, 2 million input outputs, 1 gigabyte worth of snapshots, and 100 gigabytes of bandwidth to the internet. So if we do some calculations there, 750 hours divided by 24, it should be more than a month. I think this is per month. So you basically get a month for free every month, as long as it doesn't go over 2 million requests or 100 gigabytes of bandwidth or a gigabyte of snapshots, which we're not really going to be dealing with, or you're not saving more than 30 gigabytes of files. So that's why I was saying it's going to be really difficult for you to go over the limitations for free tier. Essentially, if you do, then you have other problems on your hand because you need to scale, right? So shouldn't be a problem. Click launch instance. And this is going to create a little sliver of a computer somewhere in an Amazon warehouse that we're going to be able to connect to and add our application to. But before we can even do that, we need to prep our app itself. I have, used or talked about using things like a .env file a number of times. And this is where all of that really comes into play. Your application is hosted on GitHub somewhere, right? And yes, you may have it set to be a private repository. However, what if there's a data leak and someone gets access to that code, which has happened? Or what if somebody accidentally, goes to an internet cafe and they're just on autopilot, and on that computer, they download that source code? If you have in your keys something like this that has the person's username and password that's needed to connect to your database, Additionally, once you have deployed your application, that is your production application. Meaning, if my production application is connecting to a database and I, the developer, am working locally on my app and building and testing new things, and I'm working with the same database, not only does that put me at risk of having all kinds of stupid and useless data, all those users whose names are curse words because you're frustrated as to why it's not working yet, but also, what if I accidentally delete a bunch of stuff on my computer? Guess what? It's not deleting it just on my computer anymore. That's going to be deleting it on the database that your deployed application is working on. To give you a very, very direct comparison, it's as if somebody working over at Facebook was connected to the production database from their dev environment and accidentally deleted all of the users. Goodbye. Goodbye, Facebook. Just gone. We don't want that. So for a number of reasons, don't recommend having this be your real connection string. The same way that your access token secret should not be what's here. Your refresh token secret should not really be what's here. If somebody gets access to this file, which is a lot easier than hacking into the remote computer that your app is running on, well, then you've got a problem. And so that's why in all of these configuration files, I'm doing things with this process.env, process.env, yada, yada, yada. I have my database URL set to process.env.db URL, or if that doesn't exist, this string. It's fine to have a fallback that is not sensitive, right? Some person, some password. If someone really wants to connect to my MongoDB Atlas instance, okay, it's the free version. I'm pretty sure they'll just stop accepting new requests if it takes too much data, and there's nothing sensitive on there. So, okay. But when I have this deployed, I don't want it to be using that database. So there's no just simple singular answer to what do I need to declare this way, but anything that involves authentication, like that process, I would have some way to pick and choose which version to use. So in your keys.js, especially if you were following along with, like using snippets as a template, you might have a lot of this groundwork set up on the keys side, but how do we get our application to use these mythical shortcuts and variables? Well, the answer is through environment variables. By default, we don't have any of these things saved as our environment variables. But if you go to path in Windows, at least, and you click environment variables, you'll see all kinds of things here. In path, I guess it's going to be down this one. There's all kinds of links to other files. And that's how we're able to do these shortcut commands in the terminal. But these environment variables can be used beyond just that path. We can also store variables, right? Like just some text. And essentially what we're going to be trying to do is taking these values, and rather than having them be inside of some kind of file, we're going to hard code them into the remote computer. And that way, the only way to get access to those values is if you physically get access to the computer itself, which, because we're using the PEM key and we're setting up our AWS instances that specific way, should really only be accessible by whoever has the PEM key to be able to connect to that AWS instance. So we're adding levels of security here. Things that are a good idea to store as those environment variables: the port that your server listens to for incoming requests, right? A lot of cybersecurity is just redundancy and making it harder for somebody to hack. There's no singular, solution that's going to prevent everything. But if you make them have to guess every single step of the way, you're going to seriously hamper their efforts. And by the time they figured it out, you might have changed things. So the port that your server listens to for incoming requests, the API prefix URL, this is really useful for things beyond security. This is useful for things like, okay, when we are continuing to upgrade our application, eventually we might have API v2, and then we're going to deprecate v1. So we want to change it from /API to /API/v1 or v2. And that makes it so that I don't need to go change it in 57 places. That's another reason why that you can use these environment variables. It's a constant that you don't want to have to go change 50 million different times, and you don't necessarily want it to be hard coded into your code. Database connection string, sensitive data. Third-party API keys, sensitive data. Authentication tokens that your application may need, sensitive data. Secret codes used for encryption or hashing purposes, sensitive data. Stick it all in environment variables. Even though you have your fallbacks here, make it different values. So I said that my hash rounds is going to be 10. Woohoo! But maybe in production it's going to be 13. Woohoo! I'm crazy. Access token expiration is set for 1 hour. Maybe it'll be 2 hours in production. Refresh token expiration 30 days. Maybe I want it to be 60 days in production, right? So for something like this, where, realistically, I might say something like 7 days for access token, because I don't feel like having my computer constantly slowing things down as I'm testing. I just want to be getting through it real quick. And then 60 days. But I don't want that to be the standard for when it's deployed. So I'll add process.env and then access token, I'll call it TTL, which is time to live, refresh token TTL. My access token secret is already environment variabled, refresh token secret. My cookie options, there are some things that are there. I'm fine with leaving this in here, the max age, although this should match this essentially. So I'll say, let's just make those match. Process.env.refresh token TTL or that. And now the thing about these environment variables is they do default to strings. So if you need it to be a number, make sure that you cast it as a number. Okay. And then you see here with my cookie options, right? My domain, if I'm developing locally, it's going to be using localhost. But remember that my server and my client are going to be running on 2 different computers. The client is going to be served from the server, but it's not going to be running there. It's going to be running on little Billy's computer 2,000 miles away. So if that application sends a request to localhost something, guess where localhost is? Billy's computer, not the server that the application is running on. So if the node environment, and I'll show you how we're going to set all of that, right? By default, if we don't do anything on our end, then it's not going to be production. But we're going to see how we can set that node env variable to be production when we're deployed. Secure, I have it as the, is process.env.node env equal to production. I'm going to set this to just false for now. Just because we're not going to be dealing with SSL certificates. That's what, I'm fairly certain that that's what's needed for this secure thing. We're not doing HTTPS. So leave secure as false, sign true, HTTP only true. Good there. My cookie secret, I want to come from an environment variable. Otherwise, it'll be this other thing. Same thing with the cookie name. But how do we set these? Well, there is a library called .env that I'm going to need to install. So I'm going to come on over to this one. I'm going to go into my terminal. And I'm going to install .env. And realistically, I want to install it to both my client and my server. We're going to need it for both. Vite does not automatically attach any kind of .env. So npm install onto my server, right? Use that server workspace .env. And so just a little bit of a shortcut. If I need to run multiple commands sequentially, and I don't want to wait, type the next one, wait, type the next one, if I separate them with a double ampersand, then it will just run the first one and then do the next one after that's done, and then the next one after that's done. I'm installing .env on my server and on my client side. Cool. Perfect. Now that I have that installed in my app.js, the first line is going to be import.env/config. And what that's going to do is that's going to allow my app to try and tap into some environment variable file. And this will also allow you to have all this done locally, right? Like, let's say that you don't want to have all these fallback values, or maybe you don't want every developer to be working with the same test database because maybe there's, some data that is not necessary, or, you don't want Jeff to go make a change to the database and then it breaks Lisa's app, right? They should not be working on the same exact database. So you create a file in your root server directory or client directory, depending on which one you're trying to use the variable in, right? That's something to keep in mind. Do not have anything from client used in server. Try not to have anything from server used in client. There's going to be one exception that we're going to see later. But other than that, none of these config keys should be used on the client side. And that's why I have them all here. And we're going to have a separate one on the client side. And the same thing goes with their .env files, because import.env/config is basically going to say, let's go into the .env file and use those as our environment variables. And so you see here, I've got some stuff in here, right? It's not a lot, but that's okay. This is what I'm using locally when I'm testing. So if you have values that were strings that were just hard coded into your code, and you have decided, I don't want to do that anymore, create a .env file, use all caps with snake case, which is instead of a space, it's underscore, no spaces, and strings. You don't necessarily always need to have quotes, but there are certain characters that will ruin it. So if you've got a string, I recommend just putting it in quotes. So once you've got all of that set up as far as the keys go, something to keep in mind is that if you did not already have your port, for example, set up in your keys, you are going to have to go through every file that is trying to use a port and make sure that you're pointing it back here. So in my app, I'm going to go double check. Nope, I hard coded 3001 and I don't want that. I'm going to change that with keys.app.port. This is keys app port. Cool. And then I probably don't want it to just say hard coded in there. Localhost is now listening on port 3001. So I'm just going to replace that. Same thing here. I've got this API URL, but I have my API URL here. So replace that with keys.app.api URL. Same thing goes up here. I'm already doing it. Cool. Same thing here with my client host for cores, and that's something that you're gonna need. And we saw why last week when we did our auth session. This is going to be necessary for your cookies working. And I think that's all I had in my app. You're going to have to make sure that you're going through and using all of those pieces of information correctly, because you're going to be deploying your app, going to be available for other people to use. You want to make sure that it's using all the right information. So this reading is just walking through that, pull those into your server somehow. And this just shows another way to do it. And then anywhere that you would use those values, import and replace the existing value with the imported variable. Now, serving the React application in production. I mentioned that there's really only one instance that you should refer to something in client from the server. And it is this. When you are running your app locally, you run npm run dev or whatever, npm start, and it runs the client in development mode and the server in development mode. In production, the way that we run the app in development mode on our local machines is that we use nodemon, which is going to consistently and constantly listen for any file changes, and then we'll automatically restart the server. That listening takes computational power. It uses resources. Same thing goes for the client side. There is something going on behind the scenes that is forcing it to listen for changes. When you deploy your application, every once in a while, you may refresh the files, and that's when you make your updates. But realistically, we don't want to waste resources on constantly listening for changes, because what if we push those changes and then something in there is broken and it won't work yet, and then now our whole app is crashed? So what we want to do is take that client that is very much pre-compilation and create what is called a build file. Essentially, we're going to take all of this stuff, convert it into an HTML file with a single script that gets smushed together into the smallest size possible. And then we'll make it so that on our server, when it's running in production, if a request is received to just the base route or anything that's not localhost 3000, or what, I guess whatever the URL is /API/something, then it will serve the HTTP, the actual file itself. So in my app.js, after my API routes, I'm going to add the following. If process.env.node.env is production, I'm going to declare that a build folder that's in the client directory, it doesn't exist yet, but we're going to declare a folder in there as a static directory. And when we receive a request, we are going to send the index.html from that build folder. Effectively, it's going to create a pre-compiled, a pre-built version of our entire React application as a single HTML file with a single JavaScript file, and then any images that are necessary and things like that. But it's going to compile it down into that condensed version. And then when our server receives a request, it will send that back out. Now, this is the one point, this part here is where I foresee some problems, because at the very least with Create React App, this potentially crashes the server, creating the build itself. So we'll see what happens if it crashes. And even if it doesn't, I'll show you an alternative, which just has you pre-build beforehand. Yeah, so I'm just going to straight up copy this, put it in my server. After my router, if process.env.node.env is production, then I'm going to declare there's going to be a folder in here called build that will be created. And that's what is going to be the static directory. And then any requests that did not fit the predefined ones will be passed on to here, which should accept everything and send this file. And that should be what it is. Again, I haven't done this all with Vite yet, so we'll see what ends up happening. So I add that in there. And then I want to create a script that will actually build it. When I run my server on my production server, or when I run my app on my production server, I don't want to use NodeMon. So I'm going to make a new script. I'm just going to call it start because I have this one called dev. If you had this as start, then make it called build, just make it, or start : build, just make it different, make it indicate in some way that this is going to be the script for starting your build version. And I'm not going to use NodeMon. I'm just going to call Babel node app.js. And this is on my server side script. In my package JSON for the entire project, I have my server development, my client development, my overall development, and I'm going to do something kind of similar. I'm going to just make it called start. If I already had this script called start, then I'll call it like start : build or just build, right? Whatever it is. I'll do start : build. And what I need to do is build the client and then build the server. So building the client will go ahead and you'll notice that your Vite package JSON has build. It's already built in. I can do this without using concurrently, actually. I can just call npm run build -- workspace equals client $&, because this is just going to take these commands and run them in the terminal effectively. So this will first build the client and then npm run start : build -- workspace equals server. We were using concurrently because we had two different servers that we needed to run simultaneously, and now we don't really want to do that anymore. At least not when we deployed. We just want to have one server instance running. When it receives a request, it can either do the API stuff or hand back the built application. So I got that. And then we do want to have some of that same configuration as far as the environment variables and whatnot. We want that on the server, on the client side as well. So on the client side, what are we talking about here? Well, I've already got .env installed. But where on the client is there going to be something that I would want to have come from an environment variable? Well, for one, in my Axios utilities, I hard-coded http://localhost3001/API. Guess what? That's not going to work in production because your client is going to be from a very different place. Localhost 3001 is something that's running on the client computer, and the client computer is little Billy's computer, not AWS's server. He doesn't have anything running on that port. So anywhere that you are hard referencing your server, localhost, whatever, we don't want that anymore. So I'm going to create another .env in the client folder. And I'm going to call my variables react_app_something. So React app API URL is going to be equal to, and then, well, I don't know. Let's see. And this is where Vite is potentially going to give me some problems, because with create React app, you could set a proxy, which would just forward any requests to localhost/something to whatever this is. And so you could just go change that there. But the proxy does not work the same with Vite. Vite. So Vite proxy. Let's see how we do this. Mm. So invite.config.js, we need to set a proxy. And we can say if it starts with the URL starts with /API, the target should be something. So I'm going to have API URL. And then in this is going to be /API. I'm going to put it in quotes. And I need to make sure that this matches what would be API URL in here. Right. Just make sure that the two match. And then I'll have a React app API domain, I think is what I need, right? Yeah. React app API. Yeah, we'll say API domain. Localhost, whatever, works in production or in development, but not production. So here I'll just put http:// localhost 3001. And then in our Vite config, we're going to add proxy. Proxy. If it starts with /API, then we want it to go to, let me just copy this. Target is going to be process.env. And maybe I don't want it to work that way. And yeah, process.env. React app API domain. Process is not defined. Wonderful, terrific, excellent. Import.env/config. I'll leave it like as this for now. We'll see what ends up happening here. And then this is going to be process.env.api React app API URL. Okay. Let's see. Vite config process env. Let's see. There might just be something in here. Vite exposes env variables on the special import.meta.env. Oh, so there's already something. So loaded in all cases. Cool. So we're actually in an even better better spot. So import.meta.env. Here we go. Base URL the app is being served from by the base config option. Okay, so let's see if we can get that going. We'll say import.meta.env.react app API URL. Target is going to be import.meta.env.react app API domain. And then try that. Okay. Public base path. we're going to see how this all works in just a moment. Base in public path when served in development or production. Valid values include absolute URL path name, full URL, empty string, or dot slash. All right. I think this should work. I'm going to leave it as is for now. And then we will reassess. So if I want to test all of this, make sure that things still work. In my .env, I'm going to add node env equals production. And I'm going to run my new build script. So npm run start : build. Let's see what happens. So first it's going to build, and that's not going to work. Failed to load config from vite.config. Okay, so we do have something, React App API URL. Okay, so let's go see. Prevent accidentally leaking any env variables to the client. Only variables prefixed with vite are exposed. Okay. So let's do that. It's not going to be React app. It's going to be vite. Vite API URL. And then in my .env, vite. Give that a shot. Because with create React app, it was the same idea. It had to be React _ app something. Failed to load config. Vite.config.js. See if that changes anything. Okay, so let's see. Vite proxy import from .env. Root invite config.js first. We need to support it. Not read properties of undefined. So that import.meta thing is not working. To Vite import env. Oh, wait. Import env meta, import meta env undefined. Do. did that. Proxy URL, proxy target. This. Byte API domain, byte API URL, byte API domain. It said that fixed it for that person, but it don't fix it for us. npm run build workspace equals client. Failed to load config. Cannot read properties of undefined. Okay, that doesn't really help me. Let's doesn't okay. Vite where to save .env. Start there. env files. Vite uses .env. Okay, so then maybe maybe I don't need that. Client side. Loaded in all cases ignored by get env.mode. Take higher priority than a generic one. Addition environment variables that already exist when Vite is executed have the highest priority, not be rewritten. Okay, so by default, the dev server runs in development mode and the build command runs in production mode. Means when running Vite build, it will load the env variables from .env.production if there is one. Okay. So I would need this to be production. Nope. All right, let's try this. I'm going to get rid of the proxy bit. And in my source, I'm going to have configs and I'll have config.js, export const API URL is going to be equal to import dot meta dot env dot vite. Just do vite API URL. And then in my .env, vite API URL, we'll just do this whole thing. I just want to make sure that this is going to work. npm run build, or build workspace equals client. Okay, there we go. Elliot, to answer your question, I'm not going to need a test URL. There's a whole other process to hook up one of these AWS domains. But I appreciate it. Okay, so we've got, okay, so it puts it in a folder called dist. So in my package.json for the overall bit here, or I'm sorry, no, in the app.js, it's not going to be client/build. It's going to be client/dist. And you'll notice in here, there is a file called index.html. And then there's some assets, and there's a very scary looking JavaScript file. This is all of the code that is needed to make your React app do what it does, but condensed down into minified pure JavaScript. And that is your production application, this file right there. So I'm going to test that the whole thing works now. npm run start :build. That should try and build the client app and run the server. Error lifecycle script start build failed with error. Path is not defined. Oh, right. So I need to import path. Okay, there we go. It's a good idea to get all this stuff ironed out now, because it's going to be a lot harder to test all of it once it's deployed. I know we still haven't even done the deployment part yet. Crazy, crazy, crazy. Okay, listening on port 3001, connection established. If I go to localhost 3001, look at that. We're on my actual application / oh, I forgot what the route was on the client. Let me just add some of that stuff in here, because otherwise it's going to make it real difficult to test things. Toggle. Oh, right, because now I don't have it listening for those changes, which is fine. I didn't want it to. I'm gonna rebuild. Okay. Server listening on port 3001. If I refresh, so you'll notice that I'm on 3001, but we had it was localhost 5173 before, right? Why? Because of this. On the server side, I temporarily set my node environment to production, meaning that in app.js, node environment is production. So it is using that index.js file from the dist folder and serving that to any requests that come in that do not fall under the router. Meaning, now if I click here and I try and sign in, it does in fact sign me in. Let's see what's going wrong here. API auth refresh. Okay, so this is the biggest pain in the behind of this entire thing. If I click request again. Oh, there we go. Users authenticated. Cool. That actually did all work, it looks like. And yeah, so should be good now. Now, I mentioned that there may be a problem that you run into with building when we're deployed, and I'll show you what that looks like when we get there. But essentially, the potential fix is to just make sure that dist is not included in your git ignore if that ends up happening. So you would just hop into the git ignore in client and just get rid of dist and then add it and push it. But we'll come across that in a little bit. Okay, so I'm fairly certain that everything is all good to go as far as the configuration is concerned. So let's get the actual deployment done. By now, you already have your GitHub set up and everything. Node modules, .env. I think that's really all I want for now. But if you didn't, git init, git branch -m main. If you didn't, you would need to go ahead and get your GitHub repo set up, because our GitHub repo is all of our code, and that's what needs to be put on the server. So I'm just going to git add all and git commit -m deployment test commit. And then I'm going to make my GitHub repo. If you don't have it as private, you probably should set it as private. This WD October 22 deployment. That is private. Again, this is stuff that you've done before, but I didn't have it for all this. Okay. All right, there is one thing that I missed in my client source utils Axios. I want to replace this import.meta.env, or sorry, not that. I want it to be that configuration constant that I created in here. So I'm going to make that say or http://localhost 3001/API. And then this is going to be API URL, which comes from there. All right, so I've got my API URL that is coded to be this more dynamic bit. If we have a Vite API URL, we'll use it. Otherwise, we'll fall back on localhost 3001/API. This is one of the reasons why that Axios instance is so dang useful, because otherwise I would need to go through and find every single Axios call and change the URL that same way. And you might need to do that. All right, so let me git add all and git commit -m updated Axios config, git push. All right. We've got that all set up. And we now need to connect to that remote instance that we created. So assuming that you haven't logged away or anything, you just click on instances and you'll see that I've got this here, FSWD October 22. That's the one that we just made. So I'm going to click on it and I'm going to click on connect and make sure you go to where it says SSH client. You're going to open up your Git bash terminal, navigate to where you saved that PEM file. So for me, I'm going to open a new tab, lead into work, Kenzie, what did I call it? Deployment keys. That file needs to be used to connect. So it gives me an example here. I'm just going to copy that, paste it in here. And it'll say the authenticity of the host can't be established. This is the fingerprint. Are you sure you want to continue connecting? I'm going to type yes. Okay. Welcome to Ubuntu. And you'll notice that my command line has changed from showing documents, work, blah, 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 blah. And now it says Ubuntu IP 172.3.1, blah, 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 blah. That means that right now, any commands that I run in my terminal are not being run on my local computer. They are being executed on some computer in a warehouse in an Amazon building that I don't know the location of and never will. That's okay. I like that. My Zoom camera things go. Gone. Oh well. So I'm in. It's the cliche hacker moment in the movie. I'm in. Hacker man. Right? I'm in this remote instance. What do we got to do now? Oh, I missed a step. I did miss a step. Okay, so I do want to change the permissions there. So if you shell in and you need to get out, all you got to do is type exit and it will log you out. What I need to do is run this chmod 400 capstone.pem. This will essentially just change the permissions to make it a little bit more secure. Should make it so that only I can update it. But instead of capstone.pem, it needs to be whatever I called it, which is FSWD October 22. So .pem. FSWD October 22 demo.pem. And then I'm going to run that same connection command, which you'll get from AWS. So I'm in, and the first thing that we really need to do is update everything. A lot of times the version of the operating system is missing some stuff, missing some security updates, whatever it may be. We just want to make sure that everything gets updated correctly. So I am going to update everything and also make sure that I get the most accurate versions of all of the different packages that we may need. So sudo apt-get update-y and sudo apt-get upgrade-y. And I think since this reading was created, I shouldn't end up getting this big angry looking pink screen. But we shall see. Let me do this. Put these side by side. This does take a little bit. But while it's doing that, let's talk about the next step. These operating systems are pre-configured with specific versions of all of the very commonly used packages, or at least the links to where to get them. That's just kind of how Linux does things. It has like a file that contains the URLs that you would need to send a request to get and download and install everything. Oh boy, I'm just going to say restart everything. Cool. All right. Node.js, I believe by default, and it may have changed, but the last time that when I was going through this, it defaults to like version 12. So we need to run this command to tell Linux, to tell Ubuntu to update which version it's using. Now this says to use setup version 16. We're going to just switch it to 18 because that's what y'all have been using. And that will be updated when the reading is posted. And essentially what that's going to do is that's going to update everything so that when I run sudo apt-get install -y node.js, it will download and install node version 18, node version 18, which is LTS, giving me the right one. So sudo apt-get install -y node.js. Go. All right. We're going to need to get the application source code on this computer, and in order to do that, we need to get the SSH key set up, right? The same way that we have that SSH key configured on our local machine, we need to do the same thing on the remote machine. So I'm going to run this command, but change the email address to mine. Obviously, don't use my email address because you won't have access to it. Or your GitHub email address specifically, right? What is the email address that you use to connect to GitHub? It's going to ask you which directory you want to save it in. Just hit enter and use the default, making note of that directory. So it wants to put it in /home/ubuntu/.ssh/id blah, blah, blah. And I'm going to hit enter. And it asks if I want a passphrase. You can add a passphrase. Essentially, it just means that anytime that you run git pull, it's going to ask for the password. It's another level of security. So I'm going to add one in. But if you don't want to do that, then you can just hit enter and you'll be fine. And it gives me this weird thing that means nothing to me, and that's okay. Now I need to log into GitHub and create a new SSH key. So I'm going to follow that link. Was it? The last time you did this, it was on your computer, so you're able to just open up the file in VS Code, but we don't have the ability to do that. So I need to figure out where that terminal, where it said that the public key was saved, which was right here. Public key has been saved in /home/ubuntu, and I'm going to call sudo vim and then that directory. Now this part is a little tricky because vim is the worst. Not actually the worst. It's just a little different. Vim is a terminal-based text editing app, essentially. We're not going to need to worry about the things you normally need to worry about with Vim right now. Once you get this opened, my recommendation is essentially just don't do anything yet. So it says it should start with SSH, blah, blah, blah. Let's see, using your mouse, highlight the text you see in the terminal. So I cannot do that for some reason. So that's cool. If you can't, if you're on Windows, then you can't. Oh God, how do we do this? Let's see, Vim. Windows copy. V to select characters. Shift V. Okay. Move the cursor to the end of what you want to cut. I'm going to hold the right arrow key all the way to the end. Press D to cut or Y to copy. So I'm going to click on hit Y. And then let's see. If I go into that URL from GitHub, nope, that did not work. There should be a way that I can do this. I can't remember how to do it in Commander. I think last time I did this, I was using Mac. Copy, cut, and paste from the system clipboard. Unlike most text editor, Vim distinguishes between its own registers. Okay. I think it's just the terminal itself that I use. You should be able to just click and highlight the whole thing. My terminal that I use, Commander, doesn't do that. Commander. Vim. Click highlight. Vim syntax highlighting doesn't work in Commander full, but Commander mini. Colors did work. Oh. Main menu. What main menu? Edit. Copy all. Think that worked. Hey, that did not work. Edit. Hold shift and drag. Ah, there we go. And then control C. There we go. So, all right. So you shouldn't be running into that issue. I don't think you will. I did. If you use Commander, shift and drag. Try it if it doesn't work, but I'm pretty sure in just Git Bash, you can click and drag and you have no problem. So you want to copy that and paste it into here. And then we want to get out of that Vim. So what we're going to do is just type :Q exclamation mark, :Q exclamation mark, which means quit out of Vim and don't save anything. I didn't want to save anything. Now that we've exited Vim, run the following command to create the link between your remote instance and your GitHub account. So just real quick, I do want to add something in here, FSWD, October 22 dep for deployment, add SSH key. And there we go. All right. So now back in the terminal, make sure that it still says Ubuntu, SSH-T, git at github.com. And it gives us a similar thing. Key is not known. Yes. And then I have to enter my password that I made. Cool. There we go. And I'll do it one more time just in case. And we're good. All right. Now we want to clone our GitHub repo into here. So we're going to create a directory at /var/www and cd into it. So sudo mkdir /var/www and cd /var/www. Now we'll probably end up running into some issues with permissions. So we're going to run this command, which is going to give us access to modify the contents of this file. Sudo chown for change ownership, -r, $user, /var/www. Cool. And then we want to clone our repository, which for me is right here. So I'm just going to copy that, git clone. There we go. Asking me for my password. All right. Now, if we ls, we'll see. There it is. That's the project. And now we have to build the production version of the application and run it and get everything configured. So we want to get those environment variables. We did not really want those to be just in a .env that was being passed around. We still wanted those to be hidden. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into the Ubuntu machine's actual environment variables and add the things that we need. So sudo vim this, sudo vim ~/.bashrc, and we get this big old scary file. So Vim is a little bit tricky to use. It is a text editor that you can only navigate and do things with the keyboard. If you hit I, it enters insert mode and you could start typing, but we don't want to do that yet. I want to get to the last line of the file by hitting Shift G. And then I want to hit I to enter insert mode. And you see down here, it says insert. And I can navigate to the end of the line, hit enter a couple times and give myself some space. And essentially what I need to do is find all those environment variables that are being used throughout my code. So I'm going to go into configs on the client side, and I'll go through all of these. Anywhere that it says, import.meta.env.byte or whatever it is, byte _ API _ URL equals, and I'm just going to paste this in. Control V should work. And then I'm going to put a semicolon and hit enter and go do the next one. Or actually, no, wait, I missed something. I have to put export in front. So export space, byte API URL. And then I'm going to go back into the server side, config keys, and I'm going to start going through these one by one. So my node env, export node _env is going to be equal to production. Export client host. Now, client host, this one's going to be a little bit tricky. Localhost 5173 is not going to work. We need to get what is the IP address that the client is going to be getting its, like where is it going to come from? And fortunately for us, it is, no. So we need the actual IP address. So what we're going to do is if we go over to our ec2 dashboard and we go to instances running and we click on the one that we created, you'll see this public IPv4 address. I'm going to grab that, copy it, and http:// paste it in there. And when everything's up and running, that's actually going to be the URL that we're going to use to access the website. You'll be able to send that over to all your friends and family, and they'll be able to use it too. I just realized this says post. This should say port. I'll have to fix that here in a sec. Export port is going to be equal to 3001, or I could change it. I'm going to do 8080. Why not? Export API URL is going to be /API/v1. So in that case, let me change this to /API/v1. export db underscore URL equals. And then what I can do is I can go get a new connection string. MongoDB Atlas. And I could create some better security with this one too. So I can click on, let's see, where is it? Network access, add IP address, access list entry, and I will take that IP address that I pasted. There we go. That should be, oh wait, no, just access list entry. I think that should be okay. Confirm. And then I'll click edit. Nope, not that. Database access, and then add a new database user. What is it? DB prod, and then auto generate a secure password that I'll show. I'll copy that. I'm just going to put it somewhere real quick, just temporarily. Going to paste that there. DB prod. DB underscore prod will go, or just DB prod user. Okay. Custom roles. So you add a built-in role. Read and write to any database. I think we should be fine with that. Let's add that user. I've got DB prod user. So now in my database, I can click on connect drivers, copy that, and I'm going to paste this in. And now I need to go change the database name. Deployment prod DB. I'm going to call it whatever I need it to be. And then let me grab that password that I had just saved, paste it there. And my username was DB prod user. Okay. We'll keep going. Hash rounds. Export hash rounds equal to, we'll say 13. Ho, ho, ho. I'm getting crazy. Export access token TTL. And I can say that it should be 1 day. Export refresh token TTL is going to be equal to 30 days or 14 days, we'll say. Access or export access token secret, right? I'm using these as the names, going to be equal to, and then I'm just going to, slam some chars down there. Export refresh token secret, going to be equal to, and then slam some different chars down there. And then let's see, domain is going to be equal to, and then I got to go grab that IP address. Let's see. If it's not production, it's going to be localhost. Otherwise, it's going to be domain. So I think I need to put http:// in front of that. You may have to come back and modify some of these, and that's okay. Refresh token time to live. We already did that. Oh, I just realized that's not. I'll do TTL MS or seconds. Seconds, milliseconds? No, MS. Milliseconds. The reason that I need that is because I can't turn 60D into a number. So export refresh token TTL MS is going to be, I got to figure out what this number is. 60 times 60 times 24 times 60 times 1,000. 5184 000 000. Okay. Cookie secret. Smash some chars down. Export cookie name. I'll call it something different. It's not going to be my app RT. I'll call it FSW cook. Yeah, why not? I think I should be good there. That's everything as far as I can tell. We may need to come back and modify things, but that's okay. So I've set all of my environment variables. Now I need to save my changes by exiting insert mode by hitting the escape key. And you'll see insert goes away. And then I'm going to type :WQ. And that's going to write the changes, as in save them, and then quit. And now I need to reload the environment variables. So source ~/.bash_rc. And I can type print-env type less. And we'll see if I scroll through here, access token TTL is saved, API URL, cookie secret, all of them. They're all, lots of stuff that I didn't put, but lots of stuff that I did put. So we're good. If I hit just Q, it'll exit out of that. I'm good. All right. Now I do need to push the changes that I just made. Git status, git add all, git commit -m, tweaks for prod, git push. And this is going to be before we even get anything else done. We're going to see how you get the new stuff on your deployed instance. Well, I'm inside of my Git repo directory that I pulled on here. So if I just do git pull origin main, enter my password, there we go. I got everything that I need. So we now just need to install everything. So I'm going to run npm install. And there is something to note here. If I use .env, Babel node, Babel core, or Babel preset env as dev dependencies, I might need to install them globally. We'll see if I can get away without it. Yeah. So everything is installed. It should be good to go. I can test this out. npm start or npm run dev and see if it runs. Concurrently not found. Okay. So because we have certain things saved as dev dependencies, I may need to install them globally. Concurrently is one of those. So npm install -g concurrently. Although what I do want to do is I don't want to necessarily get concurrently on there. So let me try npm run dev workspace equals server. And then we get nodemon is not found. Okay, yeah. So if I needed all those things, I would have to install them globally on the remote instance. I'm not going to be using nodemon. I'm not going to be using .env either. At least I don't think so. I don't think I'm going to be using concurrently, but I do need Babel node and Babel preset env. So npm install or sudo npm install -g Babel /node Babel /preset env. And it should install it globally on this machine, which is fine. Now, if I do npm run dev workspace equals server, or I guess npm run server :dev. Nope, I don't have nodemon. So run start : build. What did I call the script on the server? Start : build. Workspace equals server. Okay, something went wrong. Module not found. Cannot find module at Babel /preset env. Oh, I might need to do sudo because I installed with sudo. Oh, okay. So let me try npm install -g Babel /node Babel preset env. Okay, so it is access. Hmm. Okay, so I think the easiest way to work around this is not to install it as a dev dependency because we're not using it as a dev dependency. It's just part of the actual requirements. What I'm going to do is just change that here. In my package JSON, I'm going to take Babel node and Babel preset env. I'm just going to add them as full-on dependencies. And then locally, right, npm or git add all git commit -m updated dependencies versus dev dependencies, git push. Now I should git pull. And this is on the server, npm install. And then npm run start : build workspace equals server, just to see if it boots up. And it does. Cool. Now, notice it says now listening on port 8080. And we had that IP address. So what if we went to that IP address :8080? Nothing. Okay, that's fine. HTTP :80. Yeah. Okay, that's fine. I thought maybe we'd be able to test to see if it's running directly, but we can't yet because the next part is to get Nginx, and that's going to be the proxy between the ec2 instance and our application. All of the incoming HTTP traffic is not going to need to rely on the port. It shouldn't, and as we just saw, it won't work anyway. So we need to get Nginx, and that's basically going to say, hey, I got an HTTP request. Where should I direct it? So shut down my server. Oh, that's on my server. I don't want to shut down the actual server computer, just Control C. sudo apt install nginx. And then we're going to need to configure it by deleting the default configuration and creating our own. So it asks if I want to continue. I say yes. And then I'm just going to paste and run. I do want to go check something. I saw some red stuff. And okay, we should be fine. So I'm going to copy and paste this command and run it. And that deleted the file that has the default configuration. Now I'm going to copy and paste the second command and get it open. Enter insert mode. And this is what we're going to write. Server. So we're basically creating the configuration. We're going to listen on port 80. That's where they come in by default. Default server. Server name. Just going to put an empty underscore. And we want to get our Express application reverse proxy. So anything coming to just the base URL of our IP address, we're going to use our proxy pass to forward the request to http://localhost:8080. Now I picked 8080 here because that's what I set in my environment variable file, right? I set the port to 8080. So what this is doing is it's telling the ec2 server, basically, it's when a request comes in, nginx is going to receive it and say, okay, let me go look at this configuration file and see what they want me to do with it. Well, it's going to be some IP address slash something. Well, slash, hey, let's go ahead and forward that request to whatever's running on localhost 8080 on the server. Hit escape, :WQ. And then we're going to restart nginx. So sudo systemctl restart nginx. There we go. And we could test that everything works. So now we're going to do npm run, and I'm going to use that script that we created at the beginning here on our root directories package JSON. And I think I might need to push and pull again. But in the root directories package JSON, that new script that you created several steps ago, I'm just going to run it. npm run start :build. And we'll see what happens. No. Build in workspace client doesn't exist. npm run build workspace equals client, and npm run start :build workspace equals server. Okay, so let me try this. npm init -w packages /client -y. npm run start :build. Byte not found. Okay, so sudo npm install byte -g. Sudo npm run start :build. Lifecycle failed to load config from byte.config.js, cannot find package byte imported from blah, 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 blah. That's annoying. Okay. npm install byte -g, e-access denied. Rename user lib node modules byte No, I don't want to do that. Okay, so sudo npm install. Try this. Might just be a matter of being more consistent with sudo. If that's the case, no big deal. Sudo npm run start :build, please. I beg of thee. There we go. Okay. So I just need to be sudoing everything. Sudo install, sudo build start. All right. Now, check this out. Grab that IP address. Bad gateway. Oh no. Why do we have a bad gateway? We shouldn't have a bad gateway. Oh. All right. What are we missing here? I think it might have to do with that configuration file. So let me go back to that one. Sudo vim etc nginx. Okay, let's see. Server open curly brace. Listen 80 default underscore server semicolon server underscore name underscore semicolon location slash proxy underscore pass http : localhost : 8080. Okay. Hmm. Sudo npm run start : build. Check something. Something's not working right. Now this is now listening on port 3001, so something did not work properly. I think, oh, you know what I think it is? I had changed from it was process.env.post to port, and then I think I didn't actually save the config file. So git add all, git status. Yep, git add all, and git commit -m updated config port, git push. Notice that I'm in my documents. This is not the remote instance. Now I'm going to switch over to the remote instance and run sudo git pull. Yes. No, just git pull. Okay. So sudo npm run start : build. Okay. Now listening on port 3001. So it should not be doing that. Okay. So let's go double check on those variables. Sudo vim -rc port 8080. Um, Let me try something. I have .env config here always. Say if process.env.node env does not equal production, then we want to import. Oh no, don't want to do that. Oh boy. keys.app.port process.env.port for 3001. Why is it not using that? Question. Hmm. Port is 8080. Okay. So it should be getting that. Why is it not? Get full. Sudo npm run start :build. You should not be using 3001. Let's see. ec2 process.env not using -rc variables. This shouldn't be giving us problems, but apparently it is. I did this, but the problem isn't that, it's there. Problem no, that's not what I was looking for. Hmm. let me try something else here. If process.env node env equals production, then we want to require .env /config. That should work. Git status, git add all, and git commit. Silly env variables. Git push. Git pull origin main. Okay. npm run start :build. Fingers crossed. Permission denied. Oh, sudo. Sorry. Me. Don't you dare say 3001. I'm gonna lose it. I'm gonna lose it. Only place that it's there. Oh, if it's not equal to production. Ugh. I don't understand. I don't get it. Express.env not reading from exported -rc file. Okay, so sudo. Sudo is why. Oy vey. Okay, so npm install is giving us issues. Access. So let me go back to this up here. I think it was in a previous reading, maybe, where we had to change the permissions. Do that, npm install. Okay, npm start and run start : build. Okay, there we go. All right, so I'll get that updated when the reading gets uploaded. But essentially, I needed to change all of the permissions once everything was installed and everything. So I did that. Now it's running on localhost 8080. If I come back here, pretend this is a spinner. Hey, look at this. Refresh. It takes a moment, but then it loads. Sign in. Submit. Oh, I need to change that. So let's make the account. Submit. Why are things not working? Let's see. Failed to load resource. Connection refused. Connection refused. Oh boy. Localhost 3001. Why is it using localhost 3001? You didn't want that. Okay. So we've got something going on in here. Site underscore API underscore URL or localhost 3001. And then vim -rc site API URL. Oh, I don't want it to be localhost 3001. Joy 8080 source -rc sudo np or not sudo npm run start : build. Or let me back up. npm run start : build. Ay. Sudo y. Oh wait. npm run start : build. I was in the wrong folder. Okay. Let me go grab that thing again. This is just annoying. Oh, cannot find package byte imported from var www packages client byte.config.js.timestamp. What? Yeah, I'm trying to avoid having sudo because sudo was giving us some problems and then it wasn't giving us problems. Then it was, then it wasn't. So where was it? Byte from timestamp. Okay. All right. So let's try this. Oh, okay. npm install dash dash include equals dev. Byte and at byte js slash plugin dash react were dev dependencies by default. Okay. This is promising. Hey, there we go. Just npm install dash dash include dev. So I didn't even need all that other stuff where I moved where it was saved. Oy, oy, oy. Okay. Now listening on port 8080. Let's go look at what that gives us. Right here. So if I go here, pretend this is a spinner, that's fine. Get localhost 8080 slash API slash v1 slash auth slash refresh error connection refused. Uh-oh. Oh, because localhost is not going to work. Localhost is not going to work because we didn't do the proxy bit. Okay. So I do need to go take this IP address, and I need to go into source or sudo vim -rc and change this to this. Yep. And then source -rc npm run start :build. Okay. Refresh. Okay, cool. That's just unauthorized because we don't have any token set up. So sign in, switch this, Cody Thaler, Tenzi Academy, make my passwords, submit, request failed, response data, email. What? Okay. Submit, post unauthorized. I shouldn't be getting an unauthorized request. That might be on me. Authorize, sign up in my components. Register form /auth/sign in. Oh, because this should be sign up. A doy. Wait, maybe. Yes. Okay. The login form is the one that does. Okay. 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 Git add all and get. I should have double checked that everything on the app actually worked properly. Silly me. Git push. Git pull. npm run start :build. Right, it's a good idea to make sure that this is all working before we get to the next step, which is going to be making it stay running, because once we click Control C or we exit out of this window, then it's all gone. Submit. There we go. We got our stuff. Okay, so now if I try and log in, submit. Hey, look at that. And if we go look at our application, we should see crap. Cookie stuff. No, the user's authenticated, except the cookie is not actually. All right. At this point, the rest of the stuff is working through cookie related things, which we are not really using. I haven't gotten into it at all. So I'm going to go ahead and cut it there. Obviously, this was a real doozy, a real long one. But y'all have a couple weeks to get everything deployed. If you need help, just reach out and we'll get you all settled. So that's all we got for today. Reach out if you need anything. Keep working on those projects, and I will be reaching out over the next few days to start scheduling those final sprint reviews before the final presentation. So have a good one, and I'll catch y'all next time.